If you've played any role-playing games recently, you're probably already familiar with the concept of a safety tool. These are things like X cards, red, yellow, and green lights, fade to black, pause and fast forward, cut and break, do's and don'ts, consent contracts, movie ratings, lines and veils, and, of course, just wing it and read the room. That last one is not actually a tool, so I'm going to get rid of that and replace it with an actual new tool to complete our little top 10 list. But before we go into it, here's why I think this tool might actually stand on top of that list because of the problems presented by some of the safety tools we're used to using. And when I say problem, don't get me wrong, I think that safety is good, actually. And in the interest of safety, we are going to talk about some potentially uncomfortable things in this video, though very lightly, I will add. So use the chapters down below if you want to skip certain sections. You have the ultimate safe word of being able to click away, and before you go into the comments to announce your discomfort, please reflect on it yourself. Using any of these tools is going to be better than using none of them at all. And any game that you're playing pretty much is going to have an element of danger to it. If you have any kind of hit points or even a narrative backstory complete with vulnerabilities and traumas, you are going to come up with danger in the game. But what you don't want to do is present a specifically troubling scenario which causes bleed between the player and the player character, taking somebody out of the game, potentially triggering some kind of episode. So you provide something like an X card so that they have an easy out. That's good, and I think this is also a tool you can use not just for content like sex and violence, but also for more gamey elements. For example, I'm down with most things that could happen in a game as far as being R-rated or whatever, but my eyes start to glaze over whenever survival tracking of rations and torches comes up. So if there's a safety option where I can put a yellow light or even a red light on that kind of thing, that's something that I would like to fast forward through rather than spend a ton of time on a spreadsheet with. But the problem with that is that it can really shut down play. If you are a player who actually enjoys that very tangible factor of how much food is in your character's backpack, or if you're somebody who would argue that that is an inherent part of a dungeon delving game, me saying no to that shuts off your good time. And that could be an interesting experience if I could open myself up to a new method of tracking resources that I would normally find boring. This is why a lot more tables gravitate towards a lines and veils model. Your line is something you absolutely don't want to do, but your veils are things that you're willing to explore up to a point. It allows you to deal with that danger, but at a safe distance. But this also doesn't go as far as it could. Often the game master is left with a lot of ambiguity rather than a reason why not to engage with this thing that you have veiled. For example, let's say we were talking about a list of lines and veils in our session 0, and somebody says that a veil for them would be police brutality. Okay, interesting. Now, is that because maybe they want to fight police brutality, but they're not okay with role-playing it as a paladin themselves? Is it because they have some real-world experience with police brutality and would not like to see that in the game, at least up close? Or is it because that's just some reminder of real-world politics, even though my town guard kicking the little goblin street urchin is police brutality? You are not comfortable with the fact that I just called it police brutality. The lines and veils just packs a label on something without having that discussion. And to be clear before we get too much further, it is okay for you to give an unqualified no. It is okay for you to not have to give a traumatic backstory to why you don't want something in your game. The issue is that a system like lines and veils discourages the conversation for people that might otherwise be willing to open up a little and have that conversation. So That's where the palette grid comes in. The palette grid concept comes from game designer Jay Dragon. I'm going to leave links down below so that you can check out Jay's original article or support Possum Creek Games. And I wouldn't have found out about the palette grid without Girlframe, the magnificently messed up mexploitation game from Isabel Rubstadt. Links in the description. And to show you what the palette grid is all about, we're going to get a little more practical and head to the game table. We're just going to draw a couple lines. Not exactly the straightest lines, but who says we need to be straight? Now, our top quadrants are going to be things we want to explore, down low is going to be things we want to ignore. The left is going to represent risky things in our game, and the right is going to represent comfortable things in our game. With our setup out of the way, we're going to make our quadrants. Now, the bottom left is going to be things we want to block, things that would normally be a line. The top left is going to be things we want to be careful with. I need to adjust my map because this is a new format I'm not used to. Top right is going to be things we can safely have fun with, and bottom right is going to be things that we actually just think are boring. Now let's start writing out some cards so that we can fill out our grid. We have combat here, which doesn't have to be a part of your game, and it's a good thing to get a read from your players on how comfortable with combat they are. Using the input of my player and my input as the GM, we found a good spot for combat. Now we can look at sex. On the exploration pillar of play, maybe you don't actually want for natural disasters to happen in your game. You can also start adding in topics that might be more of world-building elements so that you all know what kind of fantasy realm you want to interact with. What we have here is a framework for a collaborative boundary setting exercise that goes beyond some of the topics that you might see as typical, stuff that would show up on a movie rating, for example. Now, we're letting everybody make the cards, not just the GM coming in with their list of stuff they want approved or disapproved. And everyone has a hand on the card so that they can adjust it. I recommend taking turns rather than going with a Ouija board approach. With regards to social roleplay, some people aren't okay with actual vicious mockery. Harm to animals and harm to children are usually no-go zones for my tables, but that may be a reality which you're willing to explore. Something like combat is actually a very vague category, so for this duet game, I wanted to hone in on exactly what kinds of combat. Tiny duels, smaller skirmishes, or large battles. And we got some really good insights that's going to help build the game moving forward. Speaking of big topics, let's talk about sex. Now, saying that sex will be okay in your game doesn't give a blanket consent for all kinds of sex that could occur in your fantasy world to be okay. Now, that is also a lot like in real life. I will remind my gamer bros out there, just because you get one yes doesn't mean that somebody just said yes to everything that could happen in your in real life encounter. Now, the consequences of roleplay at the game table are far less severe than in real life, but you should still proceed with more caution, not less, if everyone agrees that an amount of sex is okay in your game. Let's back it up with a few more cards and see what that discussion might look like. So, talking with my player through our palette grid, we wanted to get deeper with sex and what that meant. So, we added cards for romance, sexual assault, and the societal pressures around sex. Because we added these cards and found that they all go to different places, we were able to paint a better picture for what can happen in our shared game space. We then got even more detailed with some particular scenarios that could come up, including in a fantasy world with all manner of dragons and fae, some good old monster lovin'. And I think you get the idea that this could actually be an extremely tedious and detailed discussion, but if you are approaching really serious erotic roleplay with your group because you said that's okay, I do encourage you to set the boundaries on exactly how far you can go in different directions. And it is completely fine to cut off the sex talk and say, no, we don't want that in our game at all. And by the way, you can also get just as detailed describing different kinds of violence and gore and torture that might come up. And as you can tell, it can be easy to go overboard, so try to limit the amount of topics you're talking about in one night. You might decide to only look at more world-building elements, and you might decide that you're okay with patriarchy in your world, but don't want any of that dirty old feminism. If your group's palette grid winds up creating a traditionalist, grimdark, medieval fantasy without any of the progressive baggage, then that's fine. That doesn't affect me. You do you. But remember, when I create my anti-fascist, pro-feminist game, that doesn't affect you. Define your safe space and let other people define their own. Just pick the topics that matter most to you. And the palette grid doesn't have to just be a group activity. It can also be a tool that you use for yourself to analyze why it is that you find certain things fun about the game and why it is that you find counting rations boring. Whenever I sat down with my passion grid and gave this a good think, I discovered that I don't like rations in part because it was something boring that I did in backpacking in Boy Scouts, and because I had a really bad Pathfinder GM who used ration counting and torch counting as a bludgeon against us rather than a part of the game experience. Now that I'm playing Shadow Dark with friends and a really good game master, I'm able to have a good time with the way that game presents torches in the darkness and why counting those torches is so important. But to wrap things up, let's talk about using safety tools in general and the palette grid especially. No matter what you do for your group, safety is a discussion that should continue beyond session 0. Even with the most exhaustive palette grid or consent form, there are going to be unforeseen scenarios that come up in play. That's why we use dice. That's why we play role-playing games. So be ready for when those surprises come up and address them during and after the game. Remember to move around, add, and remove different cards on your palette grid as they come up. And remember that everybody, not just the game master, is responsible for their own safety and for the safety of everybody at the table. Using the palette grid isn't the be-all, end-all. I think you should still probably have something like an X card at the table. If you are playing in a more so-called dangerous play scenario, you should have multiple outs, verbal and non-verbal, and remember that it is, at the end of the day, just a game. You can get up and take a break. You can walk away and come back and tell why you just experienced what you just experienced and why you don't want to experience it again. And none of this is to say that your game is automatically going to be better because you include some sex and ultraviolence. It's okay to be afraid of the dark, but in the darkness there is discovery. If these are topics you're willing to explore on your own with a partner or with a group of friends at the game table, then you might just find a heightened play experience. Go have the best game you can on your own terms. Thank you for watching. Have a Nat 20 day. Bye-bye.